Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to give you a brief background to Antigone, looking at politics and democracy which made up Athenian society. So in ancient Greece, as we can see in this map here, we've got lots of different city-states. So it's estimated that there are about 1,500 of these that made up ancient Greece. Remember that the Greek word for a city-state is a polis, or plural polis. These were all independent and self-governing. They had their own laws, and they also had their own identity. So there wasn't really a sense of a unified Greece. Instead, you were part of your polis. Athens was part of the polis of Attica, and this was the largest Greek polis. So at the time when Sophocles was writing, when we're studying, there were about 250,000 people living in Athens. So the next largest probably was about 100,000. So Athens is much, much bigger than any, or Attica is much, much bigger than any other polis. About 40,000 of those were citizens. So the rest, remember, would have been women, foreigners, and slaves, and children. To be an Athenian citizen, there were two main ways. Firstly, you were born to a citizen father, so if your father was an Athenian citizen, you could be one too. Alternatively, if you were a foreigner, you could have the assembly pass a law to make you a citizen, and we'll find out how that was done later. You'd then have to register in your deme, which is like a sub-polis or a district of Athens. And in return for the privilege of citizenship, you had to pay taxes, and you could also be called up for military service in times of war. But you wanted to be a citizen because there were quite a few different privileges. So firstly, in terms of political privileges, you could be a part of the assembly, and you could also serve as a juror and a magistrate. In terms of economic privileges, you were able to purchase and own land, and you also would receive state pension and dole, so you'd get financial support from the state. In terms of legal privileges, you were protected under Athenian law, and this meant that no one could torture you or physically punish you or sell you into slavery, so you were free and safe in that respect. There's a few important non-citizens or categories of non-citizens in ancient Athens. So firstly, as we talked about in our society topic, there were metics. These were free foreign adults who were not Athenian citizens, but they were from foreign places, but they lived in Athens. They paid a special metics tax, and they had limited rights and privileges compared to citizens. Slaves were the property of their owner, so they were not their own person, and they had very limited rights and privileges, even compared to metics. And finally, there were women. Even though they were free-born and they were Athenians, they were always under the supervision of a male relative. They didn't really have their own identity and autonomy. Turning now to look at politics of ancient Greece, most polis were oligarchies, and that means that a few select citizens ruled over the whole polis. So we can see that oligarchy comes from the words oligos, meaning few, and arche, meaning rule. And Athens is a really important exception to this. So when we talked about Sparta, we learned that Sparta, for example, was an oligarchy. Athens instead was a democracy, so it was quite different. Democracy comes from the words for people and power, because it's really the people who have the power, funnily enough. So any male citizen could be part of the assembly, and the assembly was the group that made the laws. And the Athenians really prided themselves on their democratic government. An important component of Athenian democracy was the assembly, known in Greek as the ecclesia. So they met regularly, about 40 times a year, on the Pnyx, which was an open hillside. So it was also a very public meeting, which people could clearly see. And so the assembly would be made up of the first 5,000 or so citizens to arrive. They were in charge of making the city's laws, and anyone was able to attend the assembly and speak in the assembly, provided that they were adult male citizens. As well as this, there was also the council, known in Greek as the boule. This was made up of 500 citizens, and they would be chosen randomly, so by lot, like drawn out of a hat each year. You could only serve twice in your lifetime, but most citizens would serve on the council at least once in their life. And 50 of them would be on duty each month, and their most important job was to prepare the agenda for the assembly, so kind of make up a list of what would be discussed in each meeting of the assembly. So to just give a bit more structure to that meeting of so many citizens. Another important component was the juries. So these were in charge of enforcing the laws made by the assembly. And so 6,000 jurors would be chosen each year from volunteers who wanted to. And then when a case came up, about 2,000 of these would be selected. And so one of them would be the judge and the rest would be the jury. And you were not able to appeal any decision made by a jury. We also have the magistrates. So these were chosen randomly again and annually. And from the body of Athenian citizens, and they had a range of different jobs. So they might be taking taxes, looking after and managing theatrical performances at the festivals to Dionysus and so on. They might be in charge of public festivals. And so about 1,400 of these would be selected each year. Half of them would serve in Athens and half of them would serve overseas. Finally, there were the generals. Interestingly, these were elected. So there were 10 of them each year. They were not selected by lot, unlike all the other magistracies and important positions in ancient Athens. So we can have a chat about why we think that might be. And they were in charge of the army and the navy. So that is a general overview of what Athenian society and politics was like. Hope this helps you with your background to Antigone.